So once upon a time there was a game called Dandy. No, not El Dandy, we already did that joke, try to keep up. It was an overhead game where players got to navigate a maze full of monsters to uncover keys, food, bombs, and other things to survive while searching for the exit to move on to the next maze, and so on and so forth. If the concept sounds familiar, it's because Dandy served as the inspiration for the popular 1985 arcade game Gauntlet, which resulted in a lawsuit that was later settled, but that doesn't matter now because Dandy is but a neglected footnote in gaming lore, while Gauntlet, well, isn't that far off either, sadly. Anyway, Dandy also served as the basis for another game that would see release in 1986 called Dark Chambers, which would grace not only Atari 8-bit computers but also the 2600 video computer system and also the Atari 7800 Pro system. Both 2600 and 7800 versions are available for play on the Atari 50 compilation on modern platforms, and we'll be sampling both versions, starting with the 2600 version today, and then tomorrow we'll be looking at the 7800 version, which quite frankly is the version of Dark Chambers you should be playing. The 2600 edition, on the other hand, well, they tried. I'll give them that much. And the fact that they managed this on a 16K cartridge for the 2600 was probably a mind-blowing thing for the day, but this is one of those games that you sample for a bit before asking, why did they even bother? And yet, this is the version Atari chose to turn into a reproduction card for modern consumption, rather than the superior, though not by much, 7800 conversion. I don't know, explain that one to me, because I just don't get it. But let's pull back a bit, because I don't want to completely bury this one into the ground. I don't feel it deserves that much. I mean, given what they had to work with and what they were trying to pull off, it's an admirable effort if nothing else. The concept behind Dark Chambers is that you have to fight off monsters and destroy the monster generators to acquire items such as bombs, keys to unlock doors, treasure for points, food for health, and other items to boost your chances of survival, all the while seeking the exit to the next level. Each level is divided into several rooms of which you could scroll up and down but not left or right. This is in contrast to the 7800 version, which scrolled in many directions, so this was a way for this version to compensate for that. Generators create monsters for you to kill, and stronger monsters yield different forms that you have to take down before they die for real. So for example, the weakest monster, the zombie, can be killed in a couple of hits, but a stronger, ghost-looking thing, when killed off, will turn into a skeleton, and when that's killed off, it'll turn into a zombie, and then the zombie dies for real. It's a rather convoluted way of generating stronger monsters, and it doesn't make the game any more challenging than it does somewhat annoying, though the numbers game may be overwhelming in later levels. Probably not in this version, but the theory is sound at least. Part of the issue I have with Dark Chambers, particularly this version of Dark Chambers on the 2600, is the overall pacing of the game. It's a rather slow game that oftentimes has very little going on. Your protagonist moves a bit slow, and the enemies you encounter in these rather sparsely populated dungeons are no spring chickens either. So there's a bit of the old methodical pacing to be found here, and given that rooms tend to be mostly empty save for some lightly seasoned generators and pickups, the game runs the risk of being a bit on the boring side of things. The splitting of levels into multiple rooms is a neat method of getting around that scrolling only works vertically here, but having a seconds-long fade-in, fade-out transition between rooms only adds to the overall lethargy of Dark Chambers. Now, while Dark Chambers did put me to sleep a couple times, at the very least it plays well enough. Controlling your little guy is a bit on the sluggish side, but it is responsive, holding down the fire button for quote-unquote rapid-fire shots, even though you could only have one shot on screen at a time. The overall game mechanics are somewhat functional. There's never a point where the game feels broken or anything. With all the flickering going on, Dark Chambers still plays well for what it does. It's just that the gameplay it offers in this reduced format isn't really all that compelling. It makes me long for the more complete version. I admired the effort and perhaps even the ambition to bring this game over to the 2600, but I certainly don't enjoy playing this version of Dark Chambers. Visually speaking, it looks about as good as you could get with the hardware. You've got a number of different crudely designed enemies to deal with, but they're at least somewhat distinctly designed. Your little protagonist guy looks colorful at least. Solid colored walls, dark colored backdrop. Title screen looks alright at least. Sound is also pretty basic, stock Atari sounds, virtually no music. Save for a neat little title ditty at least. Not much else to say there. Overall, Dark Chambers on the Atari 2600, I have mixed feelings about this one. There's a skeleton of a good game to be found here, no pun intended, and truth be told, it's a perfectly functional version of a game recreated as much as possible on what was essentially, at the time, a decade-plus old console. And the one thing you could say about the 2600 in its latter days was that there were people willing to push the hardware to its absolute limits, going beyond the scope of what was available during the heyday of the VCS, sort of a precursor to the eventual homebrew scene that would manage so many wonderful things with the hardware. That having been said, however, Dark Chambers felt a bit too lethargic in its 2600 version, and also somewhat lacking in its execution in terms of the gameplay and overall experience. Given what they had to work with, it was a good try for what it's worth, but it just makes you wish you were playing the more complete version, and also makes you wish that more complete version was available as a reproduction card these days rather than this lesser 2600 release. But that's just me wanting another 7800 game to add to the pile instead of... Anyways, never mind. We'll be looking at that one next. Bye.